good afternoon and welcome to the University of Suffolk Learning and Teaching webinar series. And today we're delighted to welcome Fran and Luan, who are going to talk about bringing the outside in. So Dr. Fran Hyde is maybe not currently, but is soon to become an associate professor in marketing here at the University of Suffolk. And Luan is a chartered marketer with over 20 years professional experience. So we're really kind of lucky to have you both here today to talk about, essentially, as the title suggests, bringing the outside in. So without any kind of further delay, I'm going to hand over to Fran and Luan. They're going to speak for around about 40 minutes, and there will be some time for questions. So please do post them into the chat, and then I will put them to our speakers after they finish talking. So over to you both.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I am now Associate Professor in Marketing. We can say that. Thank you. So nice to see everybody today. Thanks for joining Luan and I. Let's just start off by introducing ourselves. Luan, why don't you go first?
Thank you. So as Phil kind of briefly said, I am a chartered marketer. I'm also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. I have been in marketing for over 20 years now. Started my career working off in advertising agencies, then moved in-house to be an in-house head of marketing, and have run my own consultancy business for nearly 12 years now. So kind of various different areas of how I work as a marketing practitioner. And over those years, I've worked with many different clients and sectors as well, both B2B, B2C.
Fantastic. So thanks. And everybody can clearly hear there, Luan is the practitioner in the conversation, which we'll explain a bit more as we go on. And for those who don't know me, I'm Fran, and academia is my sort of third career. So I started off in the fashion industry, in fashion retail, then I moved into fashion advertising and marketing, and then sort of into academia, and worked my way through the usual kind of PhD teaching qualification route. And I'm pleased to be part of Suffolk. And this project is very much something that I started at Suffolk and was pleased to receive the support of Suffolk. So just to kind of remind you what we're going to talk about for the next 40 minutes, it's the idea that in higher education institutions, HEIs, are really keen to demonstrate that they are connected with the outside world. That's really important to bring in people like Luan and people from industry for lots of reasons. And I think, we're all encouraged as course leaders and module leaders to kind of get those connections, have logos on our websites, all of that kind of thing. Some people even have courses sponsored by companies. And I think one of the things was kind of thinking about what is this project that's happening in higher education from about bringing the outside in, and what actually is going on here, and are we thinking of it from all parties, the perspective of all parties. So we've got about 6 slides. There'll be lots of talking from Luan and I to accompany the slides, and then obviously some questions and discussion. I'm really keen to hear your experiences and talk through what you've been up to with bringing people in, or perhaps you're somebody that's come in to an HEI. So that's what we're up to. So with no further ado, let me move on to the next slide. So Luan and I will sort of take it in turns to chat, but we might also interrupt each other because we know each other so well that if I think Luan's forgotten to say something important and vice versa, she'll do that. But this slide is probably me talking a bit more, because it's just to explain really how the project all began. And I guess for me, it was, having been teaching for well over 20 years, kind of working out that a couple of sessions hadn't gone so well, that kind of feeling when you're driving home or on the train and you think, that wasn't great. Why? And maybe it was because I had a guest speaker in and I just didn't feel that I got the best out of that session, and maybe it hadn't gone the way I wanted. So there was a bit of that. And I kind of reflected on it, and I just sort of thought, well, I'm so sure that this is the right thing to do, and I've got great contacts who are happy to come in and talk, but what do the students really think? And has anybody ever asked them? And what do practitioners think about when they come in, and has anybody ever asked them properly about the experience? So of course, in that academic way we do, I had a little look round to see what was in the literature, and interestingly, in accountancy, they've done quite a lot of work on this, looking at bringing practitioners in, but in the marketing area, not much, and wider in higher education, not much either. So I thought, here's an opportunity. And you'll see from the slide that I also had the opportunity to apply for some funding. So the Academy of Marketing is really the trade organisation, for want of a better word, for marketing academics. And they have a teaching award. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put this project together about talking to students and staff. I got a learning teaching grant, which allowed me to fund the research. And the research was, and obviously it all went through the university ethics procedure, but it was to follow a cohort of students through a marketing module, and which had two guest speakers involved in the module, practitioners. And I interviewed the students and the practitioners before, in the middle of the module, and after the module, but before the assessment the marks were returned to students. So I wanted to see, it was an exploratory study. It involved 50% of the students were happy and agreed to be interviewed. Obviously, both practitioners agreed and were happy. So, it wasn't large scale, but it was the idea of seeing what they thought as the module progressed. And that was what I had my research grant for. And it became quite a big project. I took it to the Chartered Association of Business Schools Learning and Teaching Conference in Belfast, so it was a nice vehicle to take somewhere else. And Luan and I also pitched in for some extra funding. And we recorded that, again, the Academy of Marketing wanted to build up some key resources. That's the picture, the slightly smaller image. So that was about getting a bank of resources ready for people who were just beginning teaching. So we recorded a podcast, and that's now in that bank of resources. So what started out as quite a small idea has kind of kept going, and it's something that I keep reflecting on. And what we're hoping to show you today is a little bit of how this research has informed our thinking, and why I think it's really important that we don't get too hung up on what we think, and we keep remembering that there's at least two other parties involved in this, and they are really important, and how we capture their views. So that's the project, and now we'll talk a little bit more about kind of how it works, and what I learned from the project too. Okay, Luan, do you want to talk a little bit from your experience, just to start off with, about kind of why, as a practitioner, you go in and what you're hoping will be the end result?
Yeah, I'll just take a step back and say to everyone watching that it was you presenting your paper at the Academy of Marketing conference that's how we met, because perhaps slightly unusual as a practitioner, I came along to the conference and selected your talk as a session I wanted to attend, and couldn't help myself but kind of put my hand up at the end and say, I am a practitioner, let me jump in. But why was I there, and how have I kind of, as a practitioner, got involved potentially in the outside coming in? Is it happened really organically for me. It wasn't something that I intentionally went looking for, even knew that this could be an opportunity, or even that actually speaking as a practitioner at events was a thing, and that I would enjoy it and find value in it for many different reasons. But that came about because I was a volunteer locally where I live with the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Got kind of put my hand up one day to say, yeah, I'll do a session on my area of my topic, and kind of got into speaking that way. And when you do get into speaking and you share it on social media, and people know about it, you tend to then start getting messages saying, oh, I've heard you've done this, could you come and do this for us. And I had an invitation many years ago now from a student who was organising a marketing society event, looking for a speaker to come in and talk about LinkedIn and social media, invited me along, and then you know, obviously started talking with the academic who was involved in it, and became very good friends. And that's how it started for me, was kind of being invited in by a very savvy student. And I think the reason I said yes was in part just going back to university is a bit nostalgic, and you know, have very positive and fond memories of being a university student. So to then go back in and speak to current students was like, oh, this could be fun and cool. But just the first time I did it and seeing the reaction from the students, as you know, having someone from the outside world who's actually doing what they're learning come and talk to them about it, completely unplanned, but obviously reinforcing what the lecturers and academics had said to them, that this is what practitioners do and this is how it works. Just being able to kind of see those light bulb moments and hear the questions that were being asked and get to know the next generation of marketers. You can probably hear it in my voice already. I would do this every week if I could, because the more I've done it, I've just enjoyed it so much, and just, yeah, had some great conversations with academics and students alike.
That's great. Thanks, Luan. So that's, you know, why Luan does it. And the interesting thing was, from talking to the practitioners involved in my research, you know, it's a very generous spirit, and it's really appreciated. And I think the thing that I found out from my research, which was interesting, was actually it's really important, and we'll kind of come back to this in a little, we'll revisit this, but it's really important to have that initial conversation about what to get to know the practitioner, because actually what I found from my research is they would have done more and slightly different things to what I wanted them to do, and that was my fault for not picking that up in an initial conversation. For instance, one of them would have happily come back in again on Teams, didn't particularly want to come back in in person, but would have offered the students a bit more time on Teams or a follow-up. And that was something which, you know, would have been good, and I'm sure could have been arranged. And also, it's interesting what you said, Luan, about coming back into higher education, because I think that was the other thing that I picked up from my research was, you know, it can be quite a long time since the practitioner's been a student. So one in one of the interviews, they said, you know, it was quite weird. They were remembering being a student, and actually I think there was some emotion there for them, because it was about revisiting their student days. Now, we all know life's really changed a lot, and I think thereby lies a little bit of a danger that you again need to be careful of, because universities and students and the whole situation has changed, and so a little bit of kind of briefing of that is also helpful. But I think it is, you know, it's about that giving back, but also there is something about revisiting what for a lot of people has been a really happy time of their life and wanting to contribute back, which is really nice. Not forgetting the students, which was obviously what this idea was all about. I've put some of the kind of things that I discussed with the students on the slide, so you can, some of the kind of words that I used when I was interviewing them. On one, you know, some of the interviews, it was really interesting to see that the students had made the connections, so they could absolutely see why that particular practitioner had come in. They could see, and they could make the connections, and it was useful. I have to say, and again, this was a wake-up call to me, some of them absolutely didn't. And, you know, it wasn't that they didn't enjoy the session, but they clearly thought, and I think one of them even said to me, oh, it's much easier to bring a guest speaker in, isn't it, Fran, than do a session, which, of course, it's a bit like school trips, you know, it's actually more complicated than just showing 20 PowerPoint slides. But I thought, well, that's my problem. I didn't make it clear enough, and we'll talk about that as well in a little bit. But it was a wake-up call to me that just because I thought these were amazingly really interesting people who had a lot to say, the students aren't necessarily going to think that, and they're quite entitled not to think that. And obviously there are always students who are really focused on the end game and the assessment, and it's all about what's this benefit of this to the assessment? Now,
Yeah.
I try not to do that too much, because we shouldn't just be teaching to the test. But fair enough, you know, if I'm not doing the session, then, you know, why is this person here, and what could be beneficial? So I think that was a good, I found that interviewing the students in the study really interesting, because it did shatter a few of my illusions and made me realise that whereas the things on the slides were all my thoughts, you know, don't assume that that's what the students are thinking. And, you know, particularly if you're going to have a lot of guest speakers in, then, you know, again, for every speaker, you need to do the preparation, because don't assume that just because one speaker, they've made the connection, they will for the others. So yeah, so I was pleased to have done that, because it was, as I say, it was a bit of a revelation to me at times.
And I think there's probably also something that the students, if are used to you, so having a guest in is a bit kind of, you know, who is this person and why are they coming in and what are they doing and where does this fit?
I'm so pleased you said that, because as you said that, I just looked at my notes, and I meant to say that one of the students did say they found it intimidating having an outside speaker. So thanks, Luan. I think that's a really good point. You know, there are lots of different, students come with lots of different backgrounds, experiences, life experiences, and I think I've needed to work harder to prepare students and prepare the ground, because I think that, again, it's the assumption I have that, oh, this is going to be really interesting, and actually just having somebody, as you say, they're not used to seeing that person, they've been used to me for X many weeks.
Yeah.
You know, and if somebody's finds it difficult to speak up, you know, that's going to be even harder for them if somebody's in the room who doesn't know them. So yeah, great.
Yeah.
Right, well, shall we move on to how you kind of get started? So this is sharing a few of our thoughts, and you know, some of the things we've done to kind of bring the outside in. Luan, do you want to talk about yours first?
Yeah, so I think just to reiterate, the first example was I was invited in to start with, and you know, that was great. I was found on LinkedIn. A student searched and sent me a private message, and I have guest lectured at many universities over the past few years, and I wanted to share this example because it's quite recent but also was hugely valuable. Was I host a lot of live events on LinkedIn, on Zoom as well. I'm talking about them all the time on my social media platforms, and potentially not surprisingly, but this topic that I talked about in November about how AI is changing social media marketing turned out to be a very popular topic, and lots of people registered for it, which you can do. It's free on LinkedIn. And as a marketer, as a business owner, you know, I'm hosting free events, so I work them, and I work them hard. It's my way of getting in front of people, talking to people and sending messages. So one of the things that I always do as a networker is say thank you for registering, and you know, here's the link. And there were some academics who had signed up to watch this session, and Shaheen from Goldsmiths was one of them. I sent the message, you know, thanks for registering. And what was amazing was that Shaheen came back actually quite quickly to say, you know, thanks for sending the link. She teaches at Goldsmiths and would like to request a guest lecture. And then we started chatting from that. So I think my tip is use LinkedIn as a platform, find your potential speakers and engage with them, whether you watch something that they're already doing, whether you just send them cold messages. Don't be afraid to invite. You know, people will respond. Thanks,
Luan. And I think, you know, there is going to be a bit of a theme here on LinkedIn, because as you see from my example, how to find people. Now, I do appreciate there's a caveat here. Not everybody, believe it or not, is interested in marketing and a marketing lecturer. So you might say, well, that's all very well, Fran and Luan, but you know, LinkedIn is obviously blessed with hundreds of marketing people who love the platform.
Yeah.
What do I do if I'm a life sciences or a history lecturer? And we would say still use LinkedIn, wouldn't we, Luan? Because it's how you use, you know, it's how you highlight things. But most people who are working are on LinkedIn, even if they're not hugely active. And what you often find is people suggest people that can happen too, can't it? So I've had a few people respond to things, not by suggesting themselves, but pointing out that, you know, somebody else might be interested. And I think it's a really good way to find people. You just need to think about what you're putting on and sort of flag it appropriately using all the tools we have on LinkedIn. But I guess the other thing to say here is I have a bit of a rule of three, which is, because I have been doing this for a bit of time and I have favourite people like Luan, who I would always ask. But if I'm asking somebody for the third time, I would always say to them, look, you've been amazing. You've done this before, but are you happy to do it? And if not, might you be able to recommend somebody else? Because I think, you know, it is about if people are giving up their time, and you've got to respect that. And also, sometimes after 3 times, people might slightly edit, but broadly use a similar sort of basis, which is absolutely fine. A similar deck of slides, fine. You know, they're doing this out of their own generous spirit. So I think, you know, sometimes you just need to remember that. I think, you know, if you're having the same person in, you've been having them in for 10 years, it's probably time to just check that that's okay.
But the reason I'm smiling is because, you know, on the flip side, Fran, I will always say yes, because every cohort is different. And I've found that, you know, there's some universities that I go in each term to do a specific session. And yes, my slide deck, I update them. I talk about social media, so it changes all the time anyway. And I'll always, you know, ask about the cohort. We'll come on to that. But every cohort is completely different. And asks different questions and interacts with you differently. So for as a guest speaker, I would say yes, because I know it's going to be different. It's not going to be the same, and I'm going to get all those positive vibes back from a different group as well. You know, I did one last year and literally had a selfie with every student at the end of it, and we've never done that before. So each time is different. So yeah. Keep asking.
And I think, just to kind of move away from LinkedIn just a little bit, a few other places that we might go. Well, you know, most people are attending networking events. You know, Suffolk's pretty good at having people coming in for networking events, you know, that we host. And, you know, you can bump into people there and you can just ask them. And most people, you know, are very happy to say yes. I've got a friend who used to kind of bump into people that she'd met on trains and ask them and all sorts of things. You know, I think people can always say no. I think the other thing is, just remember, a guest speaker, you know, can be somebody who's recently retired. I think that works well too. And those people often are, when we talk about whether people come in virtually or in person, they might have a bit more time to come in, and they are also looking to kind of share their experience. So you would be surprised at the places where you might find a guest speaker. Luan, any thoughts to add there on weird and wonderful places?
Yeah, I would say, again, it depends on your topic, but go to the professional bodies. That is where I was first found, was through the Chartered Institute of Marketing. But, you know, many professional bodies will have communities, alumni, fellow, their own networks, their own trustees and their own boards. So go into those organisations that kind of map to your topic.
Yeah, that's great. And just before we finish, a kind of for people who are listening from the University of Suffolk, but obviously in other universities, don't forget you've got the fantastic knowledge exchange and careers teams, and actually alumni, sorry, all three. Yeah. So you will have that in your own university. And, you know, University of Suffolk staff are really great when you say, do you know anybody? And I've been given some amazing connections. So thank you to everybody that's done that. And I think, you know, often you've got those teams on your university who've got these connections, but they're not going to come looking for you. So you go to them.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so right, you've found somebody, and, you know, let's just focus a little bit on what I would suggest, and Luan, from my perspective, and Luan, and I'll also cover the students a little bit from the research, what needs to happen before. So I'll start, and then I'll get Luan to kind of add her bit in. So I've put three quite different pictures up here to represent the things that can happen, or you need to think about on campus. But just before you even do that, I would say do meet the practitioner or guest speaker you're inviting beforehand. I can absolutely testify to the difference of having met somebody on Teams or in person and not having done that, and how well it's worked or not. So it's definitely worth meeting somebody, even if they're a really good recommendation, or maybe they're somebody you worked with 10 years ago. I would still always have a meeting. Email exchange is great, but just seeing them is really good, because there's a lot of kind of pre-stuff that will make the session better, which you really need to think about. And going back to this all-important connection for the students, what I've found is the better briefed the practitioner is, the more the students see the connection. So some practitioners I've met would ask for a scheme of work. They're interested in the module outline, a scheme of work. If they're involved in the assessment, they quite rightly might want to see the assessment brief. If they don't ask for any of that, have a think what is useful. Don't obviously send them, they don't want 25 pages of information, but what is it useful for them to know? Also, if they studied the subject, as we said some years ago, the subject and the way we're teaching it will have changed. So it's really important to put that prep in, just as you would with a session. So what do they need to know about what you're doing? That will really help. And definitely share all that. And then you need to kind of think about, when you're actually asking them to come in, what's the best time of day? Now, that's best time of day for students. Do you want them in the kind of afternoon slot when people might be a bit sleepy? Do you want them, think what's going to work, and then from their perspective too. I've got a picture of the cars because for people that know University of Suffolk, car parking and the one-way system can be a deterrent for people coming in. I have had to sort out a parking ticket once for a guest speaker, which was, really difficult. We managed to sort it out in the end. But, it's these things that you need to think about and work out from their perspective. It may be that actually it's going to work better to bring them in on Teams. And that sometimes, could be you're going to have 20 minutes with somebody amazing from Scotland, but that 20 minutes is just going to really add to what you wanted to bring out in the session, and they're not going to travel to Suffolk to do that. And, the cost of travel has to be thought about too, which some universities will help with and others won't. So bear that in mind. So that's the kind of, just, Luan, do you want to chip in with anything about beforehand, and then we can kind of do the day?
Yeah, I think this is really important and shouldn't be overlooked. And I think obviously I've done this many times, so I almost know my questions as well. But the reason for the car park is, if anyone hasn't been to a university campus for a long time, your car park may be 30 minutes walk away from the room that you're going to be in. So you have to allow all of that time. And I'm now used to sending an email going, can you put me a parking space, and here's my registration number, and I'll arrive at this time. And I always ask for a contact name if it's not you, because potentially you could have been teaching for 2 hours and then I'm coming into your session, a mobile number. But the reason for the laptop, the first picture as well, is that every university is also completely different in terms of setup. Some will allow a USB stick, some won't. Some of you like to upload the slides to your internal system beforehand so that students can access it before the day, copies afterwards. How is the room laid out? How is it going to present? As much as you can prepare in advance, I think for both parties, it just makes it so much smoother when you're there.
Right, yeah, thanks, Fran. And then from the sort of student perspective, I guess what's really important is that they're prepared. So going back to my research, some students will make the connection, others won't, but don't assume that everybody would welcome, a link sent out or attached in whatever format you're teaching in to the website, to the person's LinkedIn profile, so that actually you're giving the students an opportunity to engage before the practitioner even comes in. With classes where I felt, perhaps there was a kind of confidence issue. We've even done things like work on questions in pairs, so that, you know, we had the practitioner came in after half an hour, and we spent the first half an hour looking at the company, thinking about it, preparing our questions, discussing it. It actually worked really well, and I found the engagement was much more consistent and fair throughout the class, and even some of the students that often don't speak up felt happy to speak, or, you know, their question was asked by somebody else, so they were more involved. So I think really thinking about that. Obviously, students don't always know they can reference a guest speaker. I love it when guest speakers get referenced in assessment work. So showing them how you do that, you know, and making sure that they actually understand that before the practitioner comes in. Couple of things, just thinking about, you know, checking with the practitioner. So are they happy that their session's recorded? So, and slides are shared. Sometimes people are sharing commercially sensitive stuff, so they're happy for some of the slides to be shared, but they'll send you another deck. Sometimes people bring in weird things. So this is somebody that was talking about Slazenger, so brought in lots of tennis rackets. I've had a caravan on campus once. That was from Rural Coffee Caravan. That took a lot of preparation. You don't let somebody bring a caravan without talking to estates first. You might even need to check with your line manager that it's okay to bring in guest speakers, and you could do things like let your reception know, and they might be able to put the practitioner and company name up on a digiboard. So all those things are really important to check. I would also always ask to see slides. I think that a practitioner is very going to do beautiful slides that are really high quality. Sometimes you just want to make sure they're going to work on the system. Things that they've embedded in will work. It's nothing more disappointing than videos that won't play. And also, going back to the life has changed in universities, my experience is, you know, sometimes a practitioner will maybe occasionally inadvertently say something or use an image which we probably wouldn't use in teaching now for various reasons. Yeah. That's life, so better to see it before and just say, actually, could you just change that image? It's industry and practice is different to universities, and we need to be aware of that. And with that in mind, I would also say, if you do have students who've got additional needs in the class, again, somebody in the workplace may not have worked with anybody that's got Tourette's or, you know, who is hearing impaired. So you need to work out that interaction. So sometimes, you know, depending on what the additional need is, I might chat to the student about if they're happy that I talk to the practitioner, where, you know, if they need to sit somewhere different, you know, you people are perfectly capable of judging that for themselves. But just remember that, again, it's the cohort, the practitioners coming in, and they won't know that, and it would be quite surprising to them if somebody suddenly started behaving in a way and you hadn't prepared them. So everybody needs to be happy.
And I think from your guest speaker point of view, it's different for me. I run my own business. I'm in control of my content, but sometimes your guest speakers, if they are an employee, may need to get permission from their own line manager as well, and have internal sign-offs in terms of the content that they're doing. And so just to pick up on that, Fran, is that I'm always happy for my sessions to be recorded, and that, you know, I write them in a way that I'm comfortable with them being recorded. But I tend to say that actually I won't record the Q&A at the end, so that, because sometimes people don't want their questions to be recorded, and also I sometimes feel that maybe I can give more candid real life responses if those aren't being recorded. I'm never breaking a confidentiality, but it's the candidness of the Q&A and the conversation. So it's not an all or nothing situation.
That's such a good tip, actually, Luan. And I think that I now I'm thinking back, I think I've had that experience quite a lot. And also going back to the how to make students feel comfortable, you know, again, the students might feel more comfortable if the questions aren't recorded, so that they can ask them, and if they you know, they're not worried about getting things wrong, so or not pronouncing things correctly, or whatever it may be that people don't like hearing on recording. So we often, you know, that often applies in teaching. When we do the interactive part, we don't record, but the kind of presentations we do.
And I think the Q&A can be a mixture as well. So my experience is that sometimes people are, again, recorded or not, comfortable asking the question in the room, or say and allow time for one-to-one conversations afterwards as well, because quite often students will want to come and talk to you one-to-one with their questions, but they may not want to ask for it. And I think for anyone guest speaking who may not factor in time for interaction and questions, factor in as much time as you can, because that's the biggest benefit.
That's brilliant, Luan, and it really chimes with me not establishing what a practitioner, you know, that from my research, I really realised that I hadn't explored what a practitioner was prepared to do. So as you say, the follow-up. Okay, let's look at the day itself. So here's Luan, action.
At the end of the session, so we did the session, and then well, and I should say we checked with everyone that they were happy to be in the photo as well.
You're so well trained, Luan. That's great. So from my perspective, and I think, you know, again, from what I've heard from the students from the research, they are expecting the academic to stay in the room. You know, it's a module that they're on. This is a guest speaker. I think it's really important that people, you know, you're facilitating it, don't switch off. You know, it is like the myth of a student trip. It's not easier than a normal session. You've got to have eyes on the room to make sure everybody's getting on okay and enjoying it, and you've got to make sure the guest speaker is happy, comfortable, the tech's working. It's kind of, you're covering all bases, so it's definitely not easier, but if it goes well, wow, it's going to be a really interesting session. So I think it's some things I've tried which have worked quite well is I've sometimes assigned, and again it can work if you have a student who perhaps wants to take a quieter role in a class, then you can sometimes have a student who is the one that takes notes, or there's all sorts of ways of encouraging students. Sometimes I've seen colleagues who kind of ask everybody for a key takeaway at the end. They prepare the students that they're going to all be asked for a one takeaway, so the students are busy listening and thinking, well, what's my, you know, one takeaway? Then you get a really nice variety when they're shared. So you know, I think it's about making it all come together on the day. Do check with them 24 hours before they're still coming. I had a unfortunate situation just recently where I had checked with somebody but 2 days before, and they were actually off ill and didn't turn up. So, you know, and things like giving people phone numbers. If you're happy to let somebody, a practitioner, have your mobile phone number, it just helps for, as Luan says, if you get lost between the car park. From your perspective, Luan, on the day?
Yeah, I think on the day, I mean, again, I've done this a few times, and I've organised events as well, so I know what it's like. So I tend to always let people know that I'm on my way, and I'll be there in plenty of time, and you know, reassure, because I know that there'll be nothing worse from your point of view of you know, are they going to turn up? Where are they? Are they stuck in traffic? So I like to do that as well. But again, it's expectations of I have attended before and then kind of been told, oh, there's the room. I'm like, I don't know how to set up the tech, and I know it's all adults, but I don't know about fire drills or where the room is or what we're supposed to be doing. So absolutely. And I think going back to your point around having a conversation with the practitioner first makes it easier. So if the students don't necessarily engage to start off with because they're a bit unsure and nervous, is that you're the person that the guest speaker can interact with and have questions, and I think that's always good for the students as well, to kind of see that everyone's taking something from this. So I think it's about, don't leave your practitioner alone, because they might not know the environment and how this all works, and the room full of students as well. But it's as important for the students to see that the practitioner and the academic are interacting as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Okay, so last slide is kind of the and finally. So just talking about, well, you know, what happens afterwards. So obviously you're going to say thank you. So obviously that is the academic saying thank you to the practitioners. It's so important. I mean, you know, my granny used to say, you know, it doesn't cost you anything to say thank you. And I think it's something that is so important. And so acknowledge the contribution. And obviously, these days, we can do that in a way that's helpful to lots of parties and is important for the practitioner to get that recognition. So I would often, as the example given here, would say thank you on LinkedIn. And again, I'm trying to make those posts a bit more interesting by actually trying to kind of talk about some of the takeaways and some of the things that are going on. So there's a lots of thank yous now going on LinkedIn by academics visiting speakers. And I think it's tried to make it a bit more interesting than just thank you. So what were the key takeaways, or what people say? And you've got some great thank yous here from students, Luan.
I have, and you know, again, I think this comes back to that warm, fuzzy feeling, giving back, enjoying it, is that you do say, you know, I say at the end of my talks, you know, do connect with me, do ask me questions. If there's something that you haven't thought of today, then, you know, please do connect with me. And sometimes I will put up even a QR code and get them to do it in the session. And there is a mix. You're not going to get everyone in the room wanting to do that. But genuinely, I've had some amazing conversations with students afterwards. Some have asked me for internships and placements, which I don't offer because I'm a business of one, but you know, I think that's wonderful that they take that opportunity. They'll ask further questions, they'll ask for resources, they'll then come on other events, ask for mentoring, and that is the feeling that you've made a difference to a student that day. And actually, when I've had these messages, just, you know, you don't necessarily realize what difference that you're making to someone. And going back, you know, preparing the talk is your opportunity to reflect on what you do and how you do it and prep it. But one of these was from a student that was a mature student and didn't have any knowledge of this industry. So actually said, you know, the real life examples and the discussion just made a real difference to her. So having that engagement afterwards. And I've jumped on Zoom calls and team calls with one student or groups of students afterwards as well, because I just think it's so important that they have that opportunity to ask, and if they do ask, you engage with it afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Luan. And that picks up nicely on that point that I think I said at the start, which was what came through from my research was establishing what the parameters are for the practitioner. So, you know, that's important. So Luan's illustrated where she was really happy to get involved, but some practitioners might say, I'd rather come in and do a kind of chat, then they're not really that keen. So it's sort of getting that up front, isn't it, and being clear. And you know, the great thing about LinkedIn is, you know, there are ways obviously to keep in contact or not with people, so that's good. And I think but the reason, other couple of things I put up on the slide that I just wanted to say for academics who are listening, my PhD was a result of a guest speaker. The book chapter that that's in our book was a result of a guest speaker, and I'm really excited because I've just started a project with Suffolk Building Society, who are happy to be named, that got cleared in their ethics process, and that's going to be really exciting, and that's as a result of. So actually, for academics who are looking, it can be a real relationship. And Luan, it's worked for you in that way too, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got many academic relationships and friendships who I can call on for asking advice and thoughts and ideas. I've collaborated on research with another university, which has contributed to my own book as well. So I think it's not just about this transactional 1 hour. I think just by the conversations that we have all the time is perhaps I'm sharing an example with you and then you're saying this is how it's worked and things. So I think it's all about relationships, isn't it? And I think we've found it hugely valuable in many different ways.
We have, and I think that you know, for people that are on maybe not on a research contract but doing teaching or teaching and knowledge exchange, you can use these kind of experiences in applications for things you're doing internally. So you know, it kind of, the relationship continues for outside the classroom.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's us sort of finished, Phil. So ready for some questions and discussion.
Oh, thank you both so much. I mean, that was such a detailed and kind of like deep analysis of the sort of benefits, but also how to do it, and the things that you need to think about to make it effective. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to dive straight into some questions. Are you happy for the question Q&A to be recorded? I know obviously in the
Yes.
sometimes you do switch it. You can be a bit more maybe frank or candid, but we will keep them on. I think Ruth's asked quite a nice question here. So Ruth says, fantastic talk, thanks both. This is interesting, and I've tried to do this in my modules, but Ruth's found it harder in a block as the time frame is so much shorter than semester year-long modules. I think the crux of Ruth's question is almost how much would you plan in advance in matching up your own schedules in terms of teaching timetables, but also the schedule that the practitioner's working on?
Okay, thanks, Ruth. So yes, block is a challenge, and where we're teaching maybe twice a week for 4 or 5 weeks, and then that's the end of the module. I've had to rethink my practitioner involvement a little bit. So what I probably got are slightly not as many practitioners coming in, but I'm trying to do slightly more in-depth work. So what I've done on 2 modules, Ruth, is link them into specifically into assessments, so that actually they're part of the assessment, so actually it helps to kind of justify the time that they're coming in, because actually there's a very, very direct link. For example, their organisation is a case study, can be quite a good way of doing it, but it is a challenge. And I think it's still really valuable. And again, if you brief a practitioner really carefully on a learning outcome or a topic area, and then like somebody like Luan has enough time, it's fine. You've got to be really tight on it, haven't you? Any thoughts, Luan?
Yeah, just one thing, Fran, can you stop sharing the slides so that people can see us? They've asked for that.
Sorry.
I think it's about as much notice as possible, really, to put it into the calendars. People are in business, they have meetings and priorities. It is, you can't just ask someone who's working in practice if they can drop everything and come on tomorrow. Potentially, if it's on Zoom or Teams and they have availability, then yes, but it is about notice. And if you have got guest speakers that are potentially speaking at several universities, like myself, you all ask for the same date in September as well, because your teaching time is quite short on some occasions. And if Phil, you don't mind, because I caught Sarah's question in the corner of my eyes, that sometimes you do have multiple sessions in the same course and different cohorts, and can you expect a practitioner to do that? I think that's sometimes, and I have that with some universities where I guest lecture. I'm actually at one university tomorrow and Friday, but we try and sometimes group those, or potentially I know that if you have cohorts, you might say your guest lecturer is coming in on week 3 for this cohort and week 2 for this one, so that the guest can manage their time without having to kind of keep traveling back. So that does happen as well, but there's usually a little bit of flex. I think sometimes, Fran, in your weeks where you can kind of say the guest lecturer could come in on either one of these weeks to make that happen.
That's really interesting. And it kind of, I guess it's that matching up, and as much time as possible is obviously going to make more possibilities for matching up those instances.
Yeah.
I've got questions, if that's okay. I mean, there's so much to take from that in terms of, I was really interested in students can reference a guest speaker. That was a really interesting point. I also like the idea that the Q&A is the biggest benefit, and almost, I guess, that unstructured time where students can ask questions that are maybe more meaningful to them or perhaps their assessment. What do you see as almost the key benefits of those opportunities for students?
Okay, I think that, I think you're right, Phil, that the questions is where you can, for me, when the questions get asked, it's a kind of indication of what learning might have taken place. So it's a kind of, that's what they thought, or that's what they've interpreted it. So I find, for me, sitting at the back of the room or alongside, I find them really enlightening. And often I think, oh gosh, okay, I clearly need to go back over that because I haven't explained that very well. Or so I think it's, but for me, as the academic in the room, that's what I find really interesting. I'm not sure, Luan, what you would say.
I think, again, it can vary. As I've said, each cohort is often quite different, but if you know in advance, and you kind of get to know, there will be difference between whether it's an undergraduate and it's their first year or their third year, whether they've come back from placement, or whether it's postgraduate and they've potentially done a bit of work as well. So, there's differences there. But I think allowing time for Q&A or writing in when you're preparing your guest talk for Q&A, for me, some sessions have just gone in a completely different direction when I've presented a case study and a student has picked up on something and we've kind of gone, well, actually, let's talk about this and how did this situation come about and how could it have been handled and what could we have done? And I've then had questions going, would an agency have done that? Would they have done, or would the client have done it? Or, how does this all work? So I think it's almost pre-planning what the conversations could be, but that's where things kind of got quite interesting. Of don't just think that this is a lecture and slides and you're speaking over them, that they want to interact with a practitioner. That is why you're being brought in, because otherwise they could read a text or learn it in a different way. So I think making it interactive and a real life example is the benefit for all parties. And I'll say I took away so many learnings from a recent session around the questions I got asked, and I could see the way the students were thinking about things that I brought it away and went, hadn't really thought of that, or I can now use this in a different way as well. So I think you've got to think of this is about a Q&A interactive opportunity. It is not, I'm going to go and speak.
Phil, can I just go back to, because I can just see there's a question in the chat just about what you do with large, if you've, for colleagues that are teaching on, modules of 400 where they've got maybe one lecture and then seminars, or even not even the one lecture, but it's all seminar groups, because I think that is increasingly an issue and it's a real issue. And what I've picked up on that from different colleagues is that, it's whether you might have your, you can't expect a practitioner to do it 4 times. So that is a huge issue. But it's whether or not there's a conversation about actually restructuring the module. And obviously it would have to happen with timetabling and everything else. But to allow you to, if you don't have them all together in one place, where you could, part of that could be flipped so that the practitioner does come in there. And I've seen that work where, 2 practitioners came in on a module that I was involved in with about 300 students. The practitioners came in as part of the lecture, not the seminars, and that was flipped to accommodate that. But I mean, also, I know we've got we've had a really good day, some rethinking in the business undergraduate courses here, where there's a kind of day where the practitioners come in and there's a conference setting and a day with strands that work into the modules and that are picked up throughout the year. And that, that's a creative way of bringing practitioners in that then track back. And actually, I'm about to use in a module a slide from one of the practitioners used in this day in September to say to students, remember that conversation, well, look, because I think it's making the connections, isn't it, in that way. But it is a challenge, and I think it requires helpful timetabling, course leaders sitting down and saying, what, it's really key to bring practitioners in, and they're not going to do it 4 times. So how do we do it? And really putting everybody's heads together.
Yeah, absolutely. And at universities that have got those numbers, that's a nice luxury to have, to think about, I guess. So Sarah, thanks for your comments, Sarah. So I really like the idea of gathering student feedback comments from the practitioners if they message them on LinkedIn after the event. That is a really nice, and I guess it's really nice that practitioners are willing to have those conversations. One more question then, if that's okay. Do you build in time to almost debrief together, academic and practitioner, after the session, to almost think about, reflect on how it went, but also maybe what you would change next time, if this is kind of like an annual thing that you engage in? And how would you sort of initiate those conversations or debriefs?
That's a great question, Phil. That's like, reflective practitioner learning or something, some model there I think we could develop. Yes, I mean, I might do it on the train or on the car home and then pick up a conversation with them. But I guess a lot of the practitioners I'm kind of in contact with throughout the year, but I would definitely, I think that's really important. And actually, of course, what I learned from doing the research was maybe I hadn't always asked the practitioners, but as part of that research, because I asked them before, during and after, it's become a bit more of a habit now that I do try and remember to follow up, because actually I realised that there's something there that I wasn't picking up. They would have done more, which of course that's a dream response, and I had let it go. So
I think there's one thing that we didn't mention in like all the prep is coffee. And Fran, I think is part of the prep, isn't it? That I think when we've done stuff together, it's almost like, oh, and we'll have a chance to grab a coffee and catch up afterwards, or let's meet for an hour beforehand and have a coffee as well. Because I think if I share from the practitioner point of view, if you are thinking of speaking or wanting to do more speaking in business, student speaking as guest practitioners is a really good place to start and to practice and to refine your content as well before potentially you're doing other industry events or in-house as well. And and as a speaker on any level, you want feedback. There's almost like nothing worse than just like leaving and going, oh, that seemed to go well. It's part of that process as well. So adding time for coffee.
And just lastly, Phil, we don't just add to that from the student perspective, because we're trying to kind of put all three in. I think it's interesting because, we ask a lot of students lots of questions all the time, NSS, joyful things like that. But, this is what I thought. Do we actually ask them, how are we asking them? Do we ask our course reps? Do we ask student experience people to talk to students? Is it coming up in school academic meetings? Because again, going back to that, if you need some help shaping a model to facilitate this and getting access to big lecture theatres, car parking spaces, etc., you've got to start the conversation that practitioners are big parts of your teaching, and actually they need to, so I think students need to, we don't want to send them yet more feedback surveys but actually how are we getting that student's experience, and how are they sharing it? Because that's really important for the whole university community to be aware of that this is going on.
And very often, I don't know if you can't remember if you've done this, Fran, but very often as a guest speaker coming in, I'll be given a student contact as the person that's going to come and meet me and liaise with me on the day. And the academic is still involved, but it's more like, this is the person that's going to come and find you and bring you to the room and things as well. And I think that's really nice to have that conversation.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I haven't done that. I'll do that.
Yeah. It's a really good idea. Wow, there's so much to unpack there from that hour's webinar. Fran, just quickly, if people wanted to go and access the research, is it available yet? In terms of...
Yeah, but I guess the problem was, Phil, it was an exploratory study. So I've got presentations from it, but I didn't write it into a paper because it wouldn't have been, what I was kind of thinking one day was maybe I would do a bigger study. It would be very difficult to publish on that basis. But I've got, I guess there's this, and somewhere in the world of cabs, there would be my presentation too. And I'm really happy to chat to anybody about it. And if anybody wants to think about taking it further, there's lots of opportunities.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And we really appreciate you sharing your presentation, and also to the people that have attended live, but also the people watching back. We hope that you've kind of enjoyed it and found this really useful. I certainly have. It's loads of sort of food for thought. So thank you so much for your time in bringing this together, Fran and Luan. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and just encourage everybody that it's worth the effort. I think it's what makes my teaching. It's it's my soul food. I love it. So I think, I would encourage everybody, find a practitioner, bring them in.
And if you're a practitioner, say yes, because it's just great.
Yeah, and then that really comes across in terms of like your infectious attitude towards this topic really comes across. So I think it's important to tell you that. So thank you.